MQLs aren't dead, but they're no longer the main leading indicator for how well marketing is doing at contributing to pipeline. Revenue teams today need to work beyond just individual leads. The real challenge isn't picking between MQLs, ABX, or buying group engagement. It's figuring out how to bring them all together into a cohesive motion aligned to a common set of KPIs across go-to-market. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Revenue Lounge podcast. I am your host, Randy Likas. And in today's episode, we are going to unpack how to build a modern go-to-market strategy by integrating MQLs, ABX, and buying groups without overcomplicating the operational side of things. We also will discuss tech stack optimization, evolving KPIs, and how to give sellers the right insights at the right time. And joining me today is Maria Thibodaux. Maria is the Vice President of Marketing Strategy and Operations at Solarwinds. She leads analyst teams to foster a data-informed culture, and her teams specialize in data across the organization to support work in three core areas: reporting and insights, automation, and go-to-market execution. Maria, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, good morning, Randy. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Maria, so I usually like to start and maybe walk us through your background, career journey, current role at SolarWinds, and then for those that might not know who SolarWinds is, maybe just a couple sentences on what y'all do.
Yeah, sounds great. So I am currently the Vice President of Marketing Strategy and Operations at SolarWinds. The background of how I got here is the highlights tour is I had a career in financial services after college. I was in a kind of a corporate communications role doing storytelling about our product lines. I felt like I didn't have a real kind of grounding in business as I had a liberal arts kind of a background education wise, academics wise. So I went back to school. I got my MBA at UT in the full-time program. That moved me to Austin, and then I loved the warm weather, wanted to stay here. Austin didn't have a huge tech scene back then. I won't name numbers, but it has certainly grown around us, and I was lucky to get a position at SolarWinds 14 years ago. And at the time, SolarWinds was relatively one of the larger tech players in Austin. Of course, there's Dell, there's AMD, and SolarWinds has been a great ride over those years. So SolarWinds sells IT management software, and this current phase of our portfolio evolution, we are focused on what's called an observability offering for IT pros. And so we still offer a portfolio of products and are moving more and more towards that core platform offering.
That's great. Can you talk a little bit more about your current role as VP of Marketing Strategy and Operations? What's your remit or areas of focus, if you will?
There's four core areas to the role. I have a marketing technology team, so they're all things go-to-market tech. There's a lot of partnership, of course, with sales programs that we sponsor, I guess would be the word, for sales, and work closely with them to ensure success of those programs. I also oversee our marketing operations, which is all things governance and back office type of stuff. We manage a very large budget, of course, so have somebody dedicated full-time to that, and then doing all of the other governance processes like creating our shared materials for our 200-person marketing organization, ensuring that codes that we create for campaign IDs or for tracking purposes are standardized and use the sanctioned values. The third area of responsibility is marketing analytics, which is near and dear to my heart. That's been historically my background at SolarWinds and something I really enjoy. So I've got a team of analysts doing all things kind of digital marketing measurement all the way into the funnel and all the way to outcomes. And then the fourth area is strategy. That's pretty much just me. I'm point person for marketing for all of our annual planning, QBRs, MBRs, strategy kind of concepts. So those would be the four areas.
Wonderful. I'm sure you're going into 2026 planning, so you're probably quite busy right now.
Season of planning.
Exactly. You had mentioned in the green room that MQLs aren't obsolete, but they're rather part of a diversified strategy. I've got a two-part question. One is, what led you to that insight or idea? Did something happen in the business, inefficiency of individual leads, or is it more like intuition? Is there something that made you think MQLs aren't the end all be all? And then the second part of that would be maybe sharing more about what that diversified strategy looks like at SolarWinds today, and how do you operationalize that internally?
Yeah, I think for those of us that feel MQLs, it's an evolving landscape. So that statement, I think, would be held by those of us that believe that buying has changed. And I'm speaking specifically to like B2B in this context. And so the number of touch points it takes, the venues, the forums in which sellers buyers are evaluating an offering and making those buying decisions, the length of time it takes, the touch points, I already talked about that. And so it's really a portfolio of demand capture, and MQLs are a part of that. And diversifying that strategy can allow for getting in front of different or maybe targeted buyers, in that maybe a company would like to have some enterprise accounts in their portfolio. And if MQL, if you're always on digital demand stuff isn't yielding that exact audience that you're looking for, then having a targeted idea is a great way to pursue those accounts. It might be specific industries you need to have in your account base. It might be a certain size of companies. And so those other tactics allow for diversifying that audience. And then the always on stuff is just a great way. I mean, people showing up at your storefront saying, I want to buy something is never a bad idea.
No,
we would
right.
love to live in a world where that's like exclusively how we get the diversity and scale of customer base that we want. But the reality is that there's unique needs for buyers. So having a portfolio approach that addresses the unique needs of that buying audience is a prudent way to diversify your tactics.
So then is a continuation of that, as you think about other strategies, ABX, buying groups, how do you organize then for that changing buyer behavior, and where maybe the MQL is important, maybe deprioritize and you optimize with these other strategies? I don't want to say deprioritize, but as you think about MQLs plus some of the other strategies, specifically around a changing buyer behavior, right? ABX, identifying different personas or influencers are that typically would be involved in an evaluation of SolarWinds. What other strategies have you deployed or look at as you think about MQLs plus some of these other strategies?
Where SolarWinds specifically is all inside sales. So it doesn't get too much more diversified, like the way you access the product line. You have to come interact with the website. You have to evaluate the product or register that way. There's no other delivery of the software. And so for us, it's really almost exclusively like the MQL component. So like channel, of course, for us is a huge other outlet. Like there are a lot of companies that we sell to that for procurement reasons, they have to purchase through a channel partner, or in addition to that, it's a way for us to extend that audience and who we're getting in front of and being part of a channel partner's offering of other brands that they're representing. Events and in person, that's a big bet we have focused on over the last couple of years, with the belief that getting in front of our audience where they're participating, being events, trade shows, and then our world tour where we come to a city near you and host an audience of existing customers and prospective customers, has been a way that we've diversified our appeal. That has been especially important in global markets. There are just geographically locations where we see better traction with those sorts of tactics versus the traditional digital stuff. So hopefully that's along the lines of the diversification that you're talking about.
Yeah, I'm not an expert in your business, but certainly I've prepared for this. So you've got multiple different personas, right? DevOps, SecOps, IT infrastructure, CISOs, a lot of different personas, some of which may never come to your website, right? So they're never going to score up for an MQL. Does your ABX strategy, as you think about the different messaging that you want to deploy across these different stakeholders, because maybe a CISO is not going to be the person filling out the form, how do you capture that buying group or across from top of the funnel all the way through nurturing a deal?
Right. So yeah, so for buying teams, for us, it's a definition of who, like if there's a specific set of companies, which is one of our ABX strategies, then of course, like we know who we're appealing to, and we've got different tactics, digital and otherwise, to get engaged with that group. Then there's a ICP like you're talking about that might be not a defined set of companies, but a defined set of criteria. And across both of those efforts, there will be absolutely like C-level or other buying roles involved. And I think unique for a software company like us, where it's a lot about the practitioner and the utility they're getting from the product, they are almost always part of that buying process. And so they're usually the advocate internally to that team. Of course, we need to also make the appeal. There's a financial component to it, staying power, security, et cetera. So there are a lot of angles that those other roles we'll be considering in that process. And so I don't think of our strategies as being uniquely like C-level targeted. As we build out that buying team, and maybe the practitioner is the one who got us in the door and is advocating for that purchase. And then the other roles that are part of that account, like we're supporting through content that is coming through from PMM, and then other ABX strategies that we are running.
Yeah. ABM, ABX has evolved quite a bit over the past couple of years. Certainly, many people are leaning into signals and intent. Individual signals by themselves could be kind of noisy. Just curious, what's your perspective on how ABM has evolved over the past couple of years, and maybe where do you think it's going?
So the evolution, I think of it for us, I'm trying to think of our specific evolution for ABM. I feel like the tools and the technology have evolved as a concept. Perhaps like my ABM lead would feel differently. I feel like as a concept, there's not much that has changed, but the tooling has changed a lot. And then particularly how we get in front of those potential buyers or considerers, and then how we touch them, like the number of touches and how we appeal across just different ways we get in front, whether it's through like social, whether it's through just digital ads, etc. So there's been some evolution there. And then where it's headed, I think is, again, like the concept is still the same. I think we'll continue to see an evolution of increasingly diversified points, whether it's online, offline, etc. I think that's how that landscape evolves.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to go back to something we talked about earlier around the changing buyer behavior, because I think it's universal across most B2B SaaS companies where it's just much different than it was a couple of years ago, right? Our messaging strategies were maybe put a set of people into a set of sequences. We touch them 20 times over X amount of days. And I think what's happened is this mass automation has really turned buyers off, and they could spot that a mile away in their inbox, right? So it's really, I think, universal. It's really hard for companies to develop the pipeline that it was that equal to or greater than what it was a couple of years ago. And it's like the buyer fatigue, right? The mass messaging. I think it's people that are working remotely and they see a call coming in, they don't recognize it, they don't necessarily pick up. And so that changing buyer behavior is something I think most companies are struggling with. Would love to get your perspective in terms of like, are you also seeing that, and how do you overcome that?
Yeah, we are absolutely seeing that. The most tangible way we see it might be an unsubscribe or opt-out rate in a database, or similarly for calls, like a do not call, etc. We can observe that that's happening. And the way that we have handled that is when it comes to attribution. I'll think of it that way. There maybe had been this previously very tangible transactional connection from a thing went into the engine and then a dollar came out kind of a concept. And so it's more nuanced now with what you're talking about, those preferences, how those have evolved, and then just how people are showing up in general. And so there's more of an occurrence of coming to an opportunity being created, and there being no maybe like cyber digital trail that precedes that to say, well, where did it come from? And so it leaves us with less certainty about what yielded that outcome. But in terms of, running those tactics, you still have to have a measurable concept and be able to prove like, no, we do need to still do this. And so that's forced some creativity in terms of thinking about how we measure and understand those outcomes. And then in terms of evolving to the buyer preferences, again, for us, you still have to engage with the digital storefront in some way, shape, or form. And so what it looks like for us is a difference in terms of how people are getting there, and then less of that like transactional kind of continuation of that process. But communication vehicles only are what they are. So if people are opting out of calls and texts, etc., there has to be some way to get in touch. So it's an interesting thing, but like for me, it's less that you see the like direct relationship of those things and those outcomes.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think it was one of the top ABM providers did some research last year, and it was like 70% of the buying journey is being done before ever really needing to or wanting to talk to sales, right? There's just so many resources out there for them to do that research that they're delaying that. Yet we need to be able to build that. We need to be in that consideration set, right? Because I think the other part of that was even when they get to that 70%, they've got their top three vendors already in mind, right? And so it's the importance of brand building and demand creation versus the demand capture side. And yet I think everyone's wanting to see short-term results, and brand building sometimes gets pushed down into priority because they want to prioritize the demand capture. We'd just love to get your perspective in terms of how do you balance that, brand building in demand capture in today's landscape.
Yeah, in terms of the brand building, like SolarWinds specifically is a fairly established and mature brand. We have a lot of brand familiarity within our space, which is IT management. So we don't have a lot of consumer familiarity for sure. None of my friends and family know SolarWinds other than me working here. And so that, like for us, there's a lot of brand equity already established, which is hugely beneficial, but continuing to evolve that brand, and for us, particularly in the last 5 or so years, has been a very critical thing for us, both in that platform evolution, like I was talking about, and staying relevant as a category leader or a burgeoning player in that observability space. The brand has been a hugely important factor there, and the way that we balance that, and we have brand marketing teams that are dedicated exclusively to that concept. So it's kind of your traditional PR stuff. Again, those events I think is a super important for brand, like being present at the places where our customers are participating, staying relevant in that way, showing up consistently. And then in terms of other brand kind of efforts, there's an element to it on the digital marketing side, but to a lesser degree is that how we're making the appeal there. That's more to the pain points and the ICP aspects.
Let's also switch gears a little bit. I know that you oversee the marketing technology and analytics side as well. From an operational perspective, what adjustments in tech stacks or metrics are needed to align with today's buying behavior or a buying group driven type of strategy?
So from a tech stack standpoint, you've got to have your table stakes kind of infrastructure, which is your CRM, ERP. You have to have all of that infrastructure, some kind of a automation tool to manage the database. So all of that kind of infrastructure then is augmented with, for us, it's been an investment in AI, BDR kind of space. What can we automate in terms of follow-up? So there's a lot of consideration of efficiencies and not so much, again, I don't think so much is new. Like every year, it's not like, oh, there's this new thing. It's a new way of looking at thing or economizing efforts or efficiencies. So that's where we're seeing a lot of that evolution is how do you automate things that maybe took man hours previously? How do you create automation, like less room for error kind of thing? So we're seeing a lot of evolution there in terms of what we're adopting internally. And then the signals of concepts of offering out there are really interesting because you can do a lot of testing with that to understand these factors, kind of fine tuning, calibrating the scoring concepts and intent factors and signals, and using the AI aspect to automate, test things, see where you're gaining traction or where you're better off with maybe like more of a traditional follow-up with a person. That's been a lot of the tech stack evolution for us. And then in terms of evolving that measurement, it's hard to measure like how man hours spent, kind of cost of doing business. I'd love to get there, but I think that's way too 500s level for what we're looking at today. And so for us, it's about ensuring that for things that are transactional, they're like digital demand capture, that those programs are optimized. We're seeing appropriate incremental yield for what we're doing. And then in terms of the kind of less like dot connected concepts that are, like you're saying, 70% of that research taking place before they even show up, there's a lot more assumptions baked in there, right, about how they got there. And so doing what we can to understand the cause and effect, the relationship between those things. So it's the measurement hasn't evolved in terms of like, hey, there's a new way of quantifying this thing. It's all about understanding those economies that you're getting from that tech stack and diversity of tactics. So that's how I think about our measurement evolution.
That's a really interesting perspective and point. And I think you're absolutely right. It's not where we're setting all these new KPIs or new areas of measurement. So I wanted to just double click on one thing and just see if this resonates with you. I had a conversation with someone recently who was in charge of marketing analytics. And one of the things they had talked about, common struggle, it's not a new thing, is the silos of data that exist across the marketing and sales tech stack and the difficulty to connect that data to really do accurate measurement. And there's not necessarily an easy solve. The question would be, when you're trying to connect different pieces of data that are often living in different systems to get to an insight, what opportunities do you think maybe are out there for the vendors, or what struggles do you have internally to get the right data at the right time to help inform the decisions that you're making?
It really depends on the size of the business and the infrastructure that they have. So SolarWinds has the luxury of having a fairly sophisticated data infrastructure. I would assume most of your or some of your audience may be like across that spectrum of we need to use things as out of the box as possible, or maybe they've got like a hybrid of we use native reporting for this thing and then connected data for something else. And then you've got a robust infrastructure like us where we're grabbing all of this, building all of the schema from the various tools and doing all the data storytelling and connections on a custom as needed basis in a data warehouse or some kind of a data infrastructure. So I think the answer to your question is depending on what kind of a setup you have, because you have different abilities across that spectrum. The ability to do data storytelling is more limited. Like if you're using natively those systems, they might not have a connection to each other. And so vendors, I think, are evolving that concept in terms of compatibility with a CRM or an automation tool or intent signals, et cetera. So hopefully you're using something that allows you to understand end to end in terms of that tech that you're paying for. And then if the data storytelling, I think, should always be like in a scenario where the sky's the limit and you can customize whatever you want. Yeah. The data storytelling should be governed by how you go to market and should reflect that concept. And what I mean by that is that for us, like in our CRM, there's of course, a native reporting concept or capability. And the concept might say, like, this campaign led to this outcome. And it's using a very just out of the box, like the relationship is what it is. You don't get to think of it differently. But if I know that I've got a nuanced go to market where there might be a lot of touch points and it's not like necessarily this one singular thing is tied to this one singular outcome, it might be a confluence of factors. And the data storytelling I can do might allow me to understand the different attributes of all the things that contributed to that outcome. And if that's abstract, what it means simply is being able to identify those touch points. So you can only understand that the role something played in a process if it can be documented somewhere, and not everything. And things are becoming less and less like cyber trail, like we've been talking about. Yeah. And so it might be a role that the seller is playing to ask on that call and do some good documentation. That metadata is super valuable for understanding those outcomes. Or it might be something where they were part of a population, a targeted account set, and then you are taking some liberties with assumptions, and they were part of our targeted account set, and then lo and behold, they showed up 6 months later. So we're going to take some credit for that outcome. So it's also a spectrum of like super tangible steps that happen next versus some assumptions of that. But I think that that's how that is evolving.
Yeah. Two more questions, then we'll move to our lightning round, which is a little bit more fun and personal. So we had talked about planning, and it really aligns to a trend that we see quite often, which is marketing and sales working together and aligning more closely than maybe several years in the past, where marketing was responsible for a certain set of KPIs and they pass things back over to sales. And I think the opportunity here is to look at changing different processes or systems in which we can enable our sellers with what we're seeing on the marketing side of things for maybe a collection of signals or a next best action, so that marketing to sales handoff. Can you talk a little bit about your thoughts there and what you all are doing in that area?
Yes, the age-old sales marketing alignment topic. It's funny, I think when I first started here and how we thought about it and then how that's evolved to today, and there's still a lot of those hallmarks of needs or grievances aired. Like in some ways it looks and feels the same. In other ways, there is more maybe I think with the evolution of the signals and some of the AI capabilities, that there is more of a like codependency there, I guess, like help us help you sort of a thing is how I think about that partnership. And there's a couple of programs that we're sponsoring tech-wise for sales. So the platform sits with us. We manage the program within marketing, and then sales is fully on the execution side. So a strong feedback loop is critical. Having great rapport, being a resource available for sellers for that tool is how to get it successful. So helping the tool to succeed is not a like we stood it up and handed it off and here you go do the thing. Like we have a lot of vested interest in ensuring the success of those things. So I think of that as being an evolution of that partnership.
The last question I have is almost every podcast it gets brought up. We talked about it a little bit before, which is AI and what opportunities we think AI can bring to our teams. And I think there's two ways to look at it. There's the tactical use of AI, right? And then there's maybe more strategic use of AI. So as you think about AI in the context of your marketing strategy and marketing operations and the teams that you're in marketing analytics, what do you think is some of the low-hanging fruit? And then what are some of the things that maybe excite you that, the opportunity of what opportunities might help you, AI might help you solve?
So for low-hanging fruit for AI, something we've been talking about recently, and I know it's a popular topic right now, is lead management. So that's back to that MQL concept. Like these things continue to come in. Maybe they're not the most highest price tag or highest average sale value or whatever it might be, but there's some volume and it takes some amount of man hours to operate those, manage those, et cetera. And so that's an interesting use case for AI. So, early state, there's some hypotheses, I would say, around lead management AI efficiencies that we might experiment with and see, particularly in certain regions, if it's better time spent using the automation versus somebody's hours to qualify these things and manage that process. So that's one low-hanging fruit area. And then I think in terms of more strategic use case, we've got one of my team members on the marketing technology side is building out some really interesting proofs of concept for AI agents and how those can interact with not just inbound demand, but also expansion concepts on the site, like a chat kind of a concept, helping with renewal for us. Like there's a annual renewal or an ongoing subscription need. And so there's different customer touch points and I guess role types that engage across that customer life cycle. And so that is an area that we're building right now. And that is a lot more not experimental, but it'll be a matter of doing tests, right? And being able to incrementally understand what's happening and what benefits we're seeing. And it's not all going to translate to pipeline. That can't be the measure of everything. Right. And so understanding how we also diversify, it's like you said, not new KPIs, but maybe an evolution of the way we think about the benefits of these things that we're providing to the business and where we're seeing those gains.
Yeah. Wonderful. So let's transition over to the lightning round. So first question, what is the favorite part of your job?
This is going to sound maybe counterintuitive coming from the data person, but the creativity. So coming up with creative ways to solve business problems, and data maybe seems very straightforward and not creative per se, but it is a powerful tool, and using it in ways to tell a story or lobby for support, I think is one of the best parts of my job.
Now, there's always going to be a flip side to that question, right? Which is, what's the least favorite or what's the really hard part about your job?
Telling people things they don't want to hear, like this thing isn't working. I think having rapport with your teams is so important. So when you have to deliver the bad news, they know that you're doing it out of love and concern for the business and not for selfish reasons. So yeah, delivering bad news sometimes.
Never easy, right? I saw a comment that you made recently on LinkedIn. It really struck a chord with me personally, which was when you're hiring people on your team, one of the most important things is that vibe check, right? That intellectual curiosity and culture fit. And I 100% agree with that. And I don't say screen for that, but I look for that as part of the interview process. I'm curious, from your perspective, how do you detect that? Is it a feeling? Is it come up organically? Or do you have specific ways to try to draw that out of someone to help determine what that is?
Yeah, for me, intellectual curiosity means maybe asking a next level question, having a conversation, being able to process what was said and, hey, that made me think of this other thing. So demonstrating that, I think that can be done in an interview. I think if there's a good conversation going and if naturally inspires that person to think about something related and ask that question, for me, that would be what I look for. At the end of the interview, do you have any questions for me? Always ask a question.
Always ask a question.
Always ask a question.
Red,
And even
red flag when you don't.
yeah, I see that happen. But also, even better if it can come up organically in the conversation and not at that any questions for me portion. So I think that that's a great way to demonstrate that.
Yeah. So you've been at Solarwinds for 14 years and had a lot of different roles. I'm sure you made a lot of impact within the organization. If there's one thing that you're most proud of over your career at Solarwinds, what would that be?
Oh, wow. Most proud of. I'm going to go probably way back on that one. So there was an era where as we were, it wasn't ABM exactly, but like we were at heavily fully inbound. We call it volume and velocity model. So there was like, it was an MQL machine back in the day. And then the machine wasn't working so great. Not that it wasn't working so great, but like it wasn't, that was the sole thing. And so we started to build this outbound concept, and all of our CRM is architected for inbound exclusively, like very rigidly architected that way. And so my proudest moment would be helping build an outbound concept and using our data warehouse to build like an account view for sellers, created an iframe in our CRM where we could push that data, and so they could manage an account set from there in this heavily inbound sort of a notion. There was no native account ownership, and so we built it in a custom way. And looking back, like that had a very fun like startup homegrown feel to it, and it was cool because a lot of us got to get involved and very hands-on. And you might look at that today and be horrified by how custom it was, but at the time it was cool and it was powerful. It showed meaningful results, and it was exciting. So that was a good one. I enjoyed that.
That's awesome. So last question, if you had one piece of advice that maybe you'd want to give somebody who's a little bit more earlier in their career, junior in their career, and they aspire to have your role someday, what would you give them?
Learn the heck out of the systems and processes in your go-to-market, how you sell. Understanding those deeply is key to a role like this, an operations role, of course, a strategy role, analytics role, like all of the above. So understanding those deeply. That was a thing that when I started, the leader I worked with required that of the team. It was not a way early in my career thought about things, and now it's a requirement for everyone who's on my teams. Is I could care less if you can tell me what the data says. I want you to understand the heck out of the system, because the data is just a byproduct of systems and processes. So you cannot understand data well if you don't understand very deeply the place it's coming from.
Yeah, wonderful advice. Okay, so if there's anyone that would like to get in contact with you after listening to the episode, maybe best way to get with you, LinkedIn or otherwise?
LinkedIn is great. Yeah, I should be one of the only Maria Thibodaux out there. So hope you can find me here in Austin, Texas.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, Maria, thank you very much. I really enjoyed the conversation. I appreciate your time, your insights, and your wisdom. So that is another episode of the Revenue Lounge. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Bye now.